Here we go with the next one. This is tissues, histology, and pathology. As we transition into chapter 4 and talking a little bit about what tissues are and what they do, we're going to take just a moment and kind of consider the connection to pathology, even considering what a tissue is, where they come from, and how are they different, and then in subsequent videos, we'll explore individual tissue types. Let's start here. This might seem like a weird place to start, but this is a postcard I got from a buddy of mine. I knew he'd been traveling, but I didn't know where. And before I flipped the card over, I could guess where he was. Perhaps you can look at this and you can guess too. But, you know, we can tell that we have hula girls and we have palm trees and we have oceans and grass skirts. And so without flipping the card over, I could tell that he was in Hawaii. Why do I show this with histology? Many students struggle with looking at tissues in lab and understanding why it's important to understand tissues and anatomy and physiology at this level. But if you look carefully at the little pieces, the bigger pieces kind of come together. Nowhere on this card does it say Hawaii, but I could piece it together by looking at the clues. In the same way, if I look at this tissue, maybe you can tell, even just by kind of, without even a lot of background, what this is. What you see here, hopefully, is you see these large individual cells. You see smaller little cells here. You see these long, stringy extensions. And understanding even a little bit histology, you know that nervous tissue is going to be a communication tissue, and this would likely be nervous tissue, and it is. So look for the small things. Do not be overwhelmed in lab. In conversations about tissues, there is an importance to knowing tissue at this level. So please don't be overwhelmed by looking at this and not knowing what to see. Look for the small pieces first. So with that conversation, let's transition into this. What is a tissue? As you recall probably from your reading, tissues are going to be groups of cells with a common function. And there are 4 major categories of tissues in animals. You see them listed here: muscle, nervous, epithelial, and connective. And tissues are going to be combined in unique ways to make organs. So tissue level biology is going to be focusing on how do tissues work, what are their primary jobs, and how do those jobs help organs function. Before we get into a conversation about the tissues themselves, I do want to take just a moment and talk about pathology. Pathology, as you probably recall, and there it again, I'm gone. Pathology is going to be the study of disease. So pathos means disease. So pathology is going to be the study of disease. Many times, the diagnosis of disease starts with an examination of tissue samples, from a particular part of the body. Here's a needle biopsy. In this case, someone has a suspicious lump, and we are going to take out some of those cells and analyze those cells under the microscope. With knowing what normal tissue looks like, we can look for abnormalities. Abnormalities in cell structure, in the chromosomes, tell us that tissue is diseased, and depending upon what the problems are, we can know what kind of disease that is. So, again, I have no idea where I went. There I am. So pathologists rather are going to be those who are trained in looking at normal tissue, and therefore they're able to distinguish that from diseased tissue when presented a sample. Where do our tissues come from? When we talk about muscle tissue or nervous or connective or epithelial, where do they come from? These go way back to our conception or just beyond it. Early in the embryonic process, we develop what are called 3 germ layers. 3, if you want to, primary tissue types that will then become our 4 tissue types we associate with animals. So these 3 germ layers, germ not in disease, but germ as in germinal, like they produce 3 kinds of initial tissues. Ectoderm, and you see what becomes an ectoderm tissue. It becomes eventually your epidermis, becomes nervous systems, becomes pigment cells like in moles, or providing pigment around the body. We also will produce mesoderm, middle layer tissue, which becomes a lot of our muscles and becomes our gut and blood cells. And endoderm becomes many of our internal tissues like lung cells, or becomes parts of glands themselves like pancreas and thyroid. So I mention this because it is really important that we are aware that these tissue types are going to have a great influence on our final physiology. By that I mean, if we have a mistake here, if there's a mistake in the formation of ectoderm or mesoderm or endoderm, it can have profound consequences. We form these layers here way back before they have formed anything. But if there's a mistake here, or there's an exposure to a chemical here, and you mess up ectoderm cells here or mesoderm cells here, and then the messed up cell produces 2 messed up cells, and then it produces 4 messed up cells, and eventually messed up organs. Here's just one example. You're probably familiar with the syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome. If a woman consumes alcohol 3 to 6 weeks after fertilization, when these early tissue types are just really forming, then they can have consequences beyond that. Here you see some of the features that we associate with fetal alcohol syndrome. These are not fatal, but they do affect development because they occurred the way back when those tissue types were being formed. Lastly, I just want to close with, why are there different tissue types at all? I mean, how do they differ? What's the difference between nervous tissue and muscle tissue, for example? Here are 4 primary ways we can think about these 4 tissue types being different. One is the rate of cell division. Some of these tissue types are going to be dividing very quickly, like epithelial, and some very little at all, like nervous. Some of these have lots of connections between their cells that make up the tissue. They're tightly connected in some places. Other tissue types are not connected very much at all. There are differences in vascularity. Vascularity is how much blood supply they get. Some tissues are highly vascular and some not very much at all. And then in their primary functions, tissue types vary quite a bit in terms of what they do. You can look at muscle and nervous and already right there see some large differences. So when we talk about the 4 tissue types, epithelial, nervous, connective, and muscle, we will focus on these differences in subsequent videos and in class. Thank you very much.